love you.
John, Stacy, Rika died at just 8 years old after being kicked so hard in the stomach that it tore her intestine. Her autopsy showed years of abuse despite DCFS involvement. Now her mother says it's time for a change.
Kids are dying because you guys are not doing your jobs. And then I'm left in this position knowing them for 2.5 years.
Imagine a little girl with a smile so radiant, it could light up an entire room. Rika Roundtree was one of those children whose energy filled every space she entered, a spark of innocence and joy. At just 8 years old, she had a love for dolls unlike anything you've seen. A love so deep that she treated them as if they were her own children. She dressed them, fed them, tucked them in at night, and created an entire world where everything was safe and happy. To anyone who saw her, Rika was just another child full of life, full of dreams. But as much as her face beamed with the excitement of childhood, there was something tragic beneath it all, something that no one could have possibly imagined. Beneath her laughter and the joy she shared with those around her, Rika was enduring a cruelty so brutal that it would eventually cost her the most precious thing she had, her life. The world that Rika had built with her dolls wasn't just her escape. It was all she had left to hold on to keep her sane amidst a nightmare she couldn't flee from. No one saw the damage hidden behind those innocent eyes, the bruises that never had a chance to heal, the isolation that stripped her of everything she once knew. The child who loved with such pure intensity became the target of a violent, unimaginable abuse, and no one acted in time to save her. This is the story of Rika, one of too many children who suffer in silence, trapped in the very homes that should be their sanctuary. It's the story of how the system failed her, how the people who were supposed to protect her ignored the warnings, and how one child's suffering slipped through the cracks of a broken system. This is more than just a story about neglect. It's a call to action, a reminder that we must do better. Before Rika's life was stolen from her, she had a mother who loved her fiercely. Antonetta Simmons, Rika's mom, tried to be the best parent she could be, even when life threw its harshest challenges her way. As a single mother, Antonetta did everything in her power to provide for Rika. She would tell stories of how Rika would follow her everywhere, how their bond was stronger than anything, how Rika was her constant companion, her best friend. Rika wasn't just a little girl to Antonetta. She was her joy, her reason to keep going. But life doesn't always give us the luxury of time. In 2016, Antonetta made a desperate decision, one that, despite her best intentions, would alter the course of both their lives forever. Struggling to make ends meet, Antonetta found herself caught up in a web of financial despair that led her to make a decision she'd later regret. In a twist of fate, she was arrested on drug charges that, though fueled by desperation, shattered their world. It was in that moment, when Rika's mother was taken away, that the safety net for Rika completely vanished. And as Antonetta found herself imprisoned, a decision was made that would change everything. Rika was placed in the care of her biological father, Richard Roundtree, a man Antonetta had always been wary of, a man she knew could never protect their daughter. Antonetta begged the authorities. She pleaded with them, warning them that Rika would not be safe with Richard. But her words, her warnings, fell on deaf ears. Rika was sent to a home she had every reason to fear. A home where love was replaced by violence. A home where safety was an illusion. Richard, with his girlfriend Cynthia Baker, welcomed Rika into their home, where she would learn that the terror she feared would soon become her daily reality. The system had failed Antonetta, and it failed Rika. Despite clear warnings, despite her mother's desperate cries, no one took the necessary steps to protect this innocent child. And so, Rika's nightmare began. Now, before we continue, I need you to do something for me. If you're just tuning in, if you care about stories like this, please hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey. We need to raise awareness. We need to share these stories, because only through action can we ensure that children like Rika don't slip through the cracks again. If you're ready to hear more, to understand what happened next, to learn how a system of protection turned a blind eye, keep watching. What happened to Rika wasn't just a tragedy. It was a failure we can't afford to let repeat itself. Imagine a child, no more than 8 years old, who enters a house full of unfamiliar faces where she is supposed to feel safe. Instead, Rika Roundtree found herself in a nightmare. The house, which should have been a place of comfort, quickly became the very thing that would destroy her. When Rika was placed in the custody of her father, Richard Roundtree, and his girlfriend, Cynthia Baker, she stepped into a world of cruelty that no child should ever experience. At first, the tension was quiet, hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. But it didn't take long for the mask to fall. The house, once a possible refuge, became her prison. Cynthia's cruelty began the moment Rika walked through that door. It started with small things, a comment, a harsh tone, a punishment for the smallest mistake. But these moments grew more frequent, more severe. Rika, who had once loved with such innocence, quickly learned that love wasn't what she would find here. Instead, her life became a daily test of endurance. She was forced to endure physical punishments that broke her spirit. Cynthia didn't just hurt Rika. She went out of her way to break her down, both physically and emotionally. Rika was made to hold heavy objects for hours, her small arms trembling from the strain, the pain radiating through her entire body. It wasn't enough for Cynthia to punish Rika once and move on. The punishment was relentless, designed to crush every ounce of joy that still lived in Rika's heart. Isolated from the family, Rika was given no comfort, no sense of normalcy. Her clothes were ragged, torn from neglect, and her bed was nothing but a cold, bare mattress on the floor. There was no warmth, no love, no protection, and the worst part, no one seemed to care. The one thing Rika had left, the one thing she clung to, were her dolls. They were more than just toys to her. They were her family, her escape from the harsh reality she was now trapped in. But even that small solace was ripped from her. Cynthia destroyed the dolls, breaking the little world that Rika had built for herself. It wasn't just the loss of her dolls. It was the final nail in the coffin of Rika's childhood. Rika's world, once full of laughter and dreams, had turned into a daily cycle of pain, humiliation, and fear. She no longer recognized the girl in the mirror. The joy that once radiated from her face was replaced by a look of confusion and terror, a look that begged for help, but no one was listening. The system, the very entity that was supposed to protect Rika, failed her in every possible way. Teachers, neighbors, even school staff saw the signs. They saw the bruises, the strange behavior, the child who seemed to shrink more and more with each passing day. They reported it again and again. In 2016, a concerned teacher noticed the marks on Rika's arms. The report was filed with the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. Caseworkers visited the Roundtree home, but they saw no real evidence. Or perhaps they chose not to see. Weeks passed, and nothing changed. Rika's bruises remained, and the calls for help continued to fall on deaf ears. In the fall of 2018, Rika's suffering reached a new level. One morning, she returned to school with 2 black eyes, each at a different stage of healing. The teachers could no longer ignore what was happening. Another report was filed, but again, the system failed her. No one took action. No one stepped in to stop the torment. And it wasn't just the physical abuse. The emotional damage was growing, too. Rika became withdrawn, her grades slipping, her once bubbly personality fading into the background. Her school counselor noticed the drastic change. They reported her distress, her physical appearance, the fact that she was no longer the child who laughed or participated eagerly in class. But once again, the authorities took no action. Cynthia Baker, the woman responsible for the abuse, continued to refuse Rika the medical care she desperately needed. Rika's injuries were ignored, treated as if they didn't matter. When DCFS demanded that Rika be taken to the doctor for an examination, Cynthia made excuses, claims of being too busy, of not being able to afford the treatment. She refused to allow Rika to receive the care she needed, even though the evidence of abuse was glaring. By January of 2019, Rika's body could no longer fight. Her internal injuries, inflicted over months of abuse, had taken their toll. She had become a shell of the child she once was. Her body was covered in bruises, her face hollow with exhaustion, her spirit nearly broken. But the system still didn't act. They had been given every warning, every sign, and yet they continued to ignore it. Rika was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Her body, battered and broken from months of neglect and abuse, could not survive any longer. The doctors tried to save her, but the damage was beyond repair. Her tiny body had been tortured beyond what anyone should ever have to endure. When Rika's body was examined, the full extent of the abuse became undeniable. Her autopsy revealed over 60 scars, broken organs, and internal damage so severe that it was impossible for her to have survived much longer. Her small intestine had been torn, causing a fatal infection. It was a death that didn't have to happen. If she had been taken to the doctor when the first signs of abuse appeared, she might have had a chance. But she wasn't, and now she was gone. Rika's story is one of heartbreak, yes, but it's also a story of failure. A failure of a system meant to protect her. A failure of the people who were supposed to care for her. A failure of society to intervene when it was most needed. Rika's light was extinguished too soon, but her story, her pain, will not be forgotten. It is a call to action for all of us, to pay attention, to intervene, and to never turn a blind eye when it comes to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Rika Roundtree was just 8 years old when she left this world, a child whose life should have been filled with laughter, play, and dreams. Instead, it was marred by suffering, by brutal abuse that, despite being visible to those who should have cared, went ignored. In her final days, Rika's tiny body bore the weight of cruelty that no one, especially not a child, should ever endure. Imagine a little girl, small, fragile, trapped in a house where love was replaced with fear, where kindness had been traded for torment. Rika had never known the safety she deserved, and when her life was tragically cut short, the world learned the extent of the abuse that had taken place behind closed doors, hidden from view, but exposed for all to see when it was far too late. The medical examiners who examined Rika's lifeless body found something that no child should ever carry: more than 60 scars. A body that had been beaten, burned, and torn apart over months of relentless abuse. Her organs had been damaged, her small intestine ruptured, causing a fatal infection that would ultimately end her life. Every inch of her tiny frame had been marked by pain. And the haunting reality is this: it didn't have to happen. Rika's cries for help had been heard, but they were drowned out by a system that failed to intervene. Rika was not just another statistic. She was a child, a human being who was denied the most basic right any child should have: the right to be loved and protected. Instead, her life was filled with neglect, suffering, and abandonment. Despite the repeated warning signs, despite the bruises that teachers, neighbors, and even doctors saw on her, Rika's situation was left unchecked. Her suffering continued, day after day, until her body could no longer bear the weight of it. And so, Rika passed away, a victim of systemic failure. The very people who were entrusted with her safety, who were supposed to intervene, never did. The Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS, received multiple reports about Rika's abuse. Teachers had seen the bruises on her arms, on her face, and had reported them. Neighbors heard the stories, saw the signs, and reached out. Yet, again and again, nothing was done. DCFS, the organization that is supposed to protect children, failed Rika. The caseworkers who visited the home saw the signs of abuse, but still, no significant action was taken. They failed to connect the dots, failed to dig deeper, and failed to protect this innocent child. This wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't just one mistake. Rika's death was the tragic consequence of a broken system that continually let children slip through the cracks. But the failure didn't stop with DCFS. The people around Rika, the adults who should have cared for her, looked away. Medical professionals were given opportunities to intervene, but they chose to believe the lies or ignore the signs. Teachers and neighbors spoke out, but their voices were drowned by a system too broken to respond. Rika's death was not just a tragedy, It was the failure of a system that was supposed to be her safeguard, a system that couldn't protect her, despite all the signs. Rika was failed by everyone who should have stepped in, and in her last moments, no one was there to save her. In the wake of Rika's death, her mother, Antonetta, was left to face the hardest of truths, the truth that she could not protect her daughter, the truth that her daughter had been taken from her, and that no one had stepped in to stop the horrors Rika had endured. But Antonetta, in her grief, would not remain silent. She chose to fight, to ensure that her daughter's death would not be in vain. Antonetta became a voice for change, advocating for Rika's legacy to ensure that no other child would suffer in silence the way Rika had. She worked tirelessly to create what would be known as Rika's Law, a piece of legislation aimed at holding the child welfare system accountable. The law calls for stricter oversight of child welfare cases, mandatory background checks for all caregivers, and regular follow-ups on reports of abuse. It was a step toward fixing a broken system, a way to ensure that no other child falls through the cracks the way Rika did. The pain of losing her daughter never left Antonetta. It still lingers in every day that passes without her. But through her pain, she found strength. Through her loss, she found purpose. Antonetta's relentless pursuit of justice for Rika led to real change. Her story became a symbol for the fight to protect children everywhere, and it's a fight that continues to this day. Rika's story is not just one of heartbreak. It's a call to action for all of us. It's a reminder that protecting children is not just the responsibility of parents, but of every adult, every neighbor, every teacher, and every medical professional. It is on all of us to make sure children like Rika are not left to suffer in silence. We cannot afford to ignore the signs of abuse. We cannot turn a blind eye when we know something is wrong. The system failed Rika, but we have the power to make sure this doesn't happen again. Through policies, through advocacy, and through everyday vigilance, we can protect the most vulnerable among us. Rika's death was a tragedy, yes, but her legacy will continue to inspire change. Her story will serve as a reminder that we must always listen to the cries of children, and we must always act when we see a child in need. Rika's light may have been extinguished too soon, but it will continue to shine through the work that Antonetta and others are doing to make sure no child suffers like Rika did. If you believe in the importance of protecting children, if you believe that the system must change, subscribe to this channel and join us in the fight for a better future. Rika's story matters. Her legacy matters. Let's make sure the world knows her name, and let's make sure her death was not in vain. Rika Roundtree was only 8 years old when her life came to a tragic and untimely end. A child with so much potential, so much love to give, and yet the world failed her. A little girl who dreamed, who loved, who played, who believed that her dolls could be her family in a world that wasn't safe. But the world, in its cruel indifference, betrayed her. The system, the very entity that should have protected her, turned its back. Rika's short life was not just a story of a broken home. It was the story of how a child can be seen, heard, and yet ignored. It was a story of repeated failures, by her family, by the authorities, and by everyone who could have stepped in but chose to look the other way. When she cried for help, no one answered. When she suffered in silence, no one cared enough to ask why. And in the end, it was too late. Her body, marked by pain, her spirit broken by years of torment, was just another casualty of a system that couldn't or wouldn't protect her. Her tragic death is not just a sad tale. It's a wake-up call for us all. Rika's story is a reminder that we must do better. We must listen to the children around us. We must act when we see something wrong. We must never allow another innocent soul to fall through the cracks. This isn't just Rika's story. It is the story of every child who suffers in silence, of every system that fails to step in, of every life that's lost when no one does what they should. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, if you feel that something needs to change, take a moment to like, share, and comment below. Let's spread the message, make sure Rika's story is heard, and remind the world of the lessons we've learned from her life and her death. How can we do better? How can we make sure no more children fall through the cracks? These are questions we all must ask ourselves, and now, it's time to do something about it. Don't forget to subscribe and check out our other videos for more stories of justice, change, and the fight for those who can't fight for themselves. Let's keep the conversation going, and let Rika's story be the spark for the change we need.